morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome, welcome, welcome to Daring Dialogues. I have your host, and I am your host, Shantae Charles. It is season 17, and I believe we are on episode 21. Let me check. We are going to finish up this week and be about the halfway mark for this season. And then we are going to resume in the new year. If all goes well with our Creator, and as the elders would say, if the Creator allows us another day. Yeah, episode 22 is today, episode 22. And so this is our last Monday for the year and our last Black Table Talk live stream video for the melanated mic for the year. I will still probably come on, maybe do a couple of 30-second, 45-second kind of videos. But this is our last lengthy live stream, unless something outrageous happens, which we know lots of outrageous stuff continues to happen in this world and in this country. Um, but we know about the mass unalivings that have happened both in Australia and um, the shooting that happened in Rhode Island at Brown University. Many of us heard late last night as we were getting ready to go to bed, we heard about the filmmaker, producer, screenwriter, actor, Rob Reiner and his wife in that horrible thing that happened. So a lot of us went to sleep with that news, and some people are waking up to that news. So there's a lot going on in the world. And as we begin to close out this week, if you want to watch the rest of our shows, Tuesday through Friday, we will be on our YouTube channel, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, as we begin to wrap up this week of our live show. If you've never been with us before, good morning to you. I hope all is well in your world. If you're wondering where can I catch the replays for this season and for our previous seasons, you can catch our replays under our playlist on our YouTube channel. They're all labeled Daring Dialogues. Seasons, I believe, 6 and on are on there, could be more. But again, if you enjoy our show, you enjoy read alouds, you enjoy book discussions and talks, this, all of these replays and this current season is on YouTube. Why is it on YouTube? Because Facebook changed their regulations and rules yet again, and they have been deleting every 30 days any shows that we do. So our playlist, our archive is on our YouTube channel if you want to check out our previous seasons, because we have read a lot, and I do mean a lot of books through this podcast. All right, so let's hop into Black AF history. And we are on chapter 3. So when we come back, as our Creator wills in 2026, just know we're going to be in chapter 3. We're not obviously not going to get through a whole chapter today, but we're going to be in chapter 3, and I will hold that book up for those of you who are wondering what we're reading from. All right, and we're doing our talk back today on our Facebook page, Black Table Talk. So if you're on YouTube today, you'll hear the read aloud part. And then if you want to join us on the talkback segment, you make your way over to our Facebook page, Black Table Talk, where we are simulcasting. Ooh. And before we get started in the main read, I want to introduce you to this lovely book that I have said is perfect for gift giving on this holiday season. It is Illustrated Black History Honoring the Iconic and Unseen by George McCallman. Um, Lovely, 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 and we're going to get into him today. But I love the fact that every single drawing is created by a different artist in a different style in this book. We're going to just jump right to somebody I actually follow here on the Facebook platform. He is a living icon, and let's learn a little bit more about him. Hopefully, somebody will tag him today as we are sharing about his life. Terrence Blanchard, and I love this drawing that they have of him in here. Terrence Blanchard. Terrence Blanchard was born in 1962, and as we said, he is a living icon. Quote, the music itself is created to help people heal and help people deal with their frustrations. Terrence Blanchard has to date 77 film and television credits to his name, making him one of the most prolific musicians to take on the role of composing and arranging film scores. Around 20 of those works are films by director Spike Lee, with whom Blanchard has been a creative partner for over 3 decades. His oeuvre includes original scores to Lee classics like Jungle Fever and Malcolm X, and movies such as Love and Basketball, Barbershop, and Eve's Bayou. A multiple Grammy Award winner, he received the 2019 Grammy for his composition Blut und Boden for the Five Bloods. Originally from New Orleans, Blanchard started playing the trumpet as a child, then studied at the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts. But he made a fateful friendship early. Blanchard grew up with jazz superstar Wynton Marsalis. They went to summer music camp together as children. I imagine the get togethers and sleepovers where Wynton and his brother Branford, along with Terrence, played their instruments and honed their craft under the constant watch of legendary jazz pianist, educator, and father Ellis Marsalis. Blanchard carved out a niche for himself while studying music at Rutgers University. His influences included greats like trumpeter Clark Terry. Blanchard toured with the Lionel Hampton Orchestra before Wynton Marsalis referred him as a replacement in Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers in 1982. His solo career took off. He would release more than 20 albums. He hadn't considered a career in film scoring until he was exposed to the process as a session player for Do the Right Thing and Mo Better Blues, on which Lee's father, Bill, served as music director. Blanchard went on to write music for Broadway and opera, dispelling the often misplaced assumption that musicians who chose to play jazz lacked the skills or sensibility for Eurocentric classical music. And good morning to those of you who are coming in. His second opera, Fire Shut Up in My Bones, was based on New York Times columnist Charles Blow's memoir. The 2021 showing made Blanchard the first black composer in the history of the Metropolitan Opera in New York to lead a production, a bittersweet honor considering the legacy of black composers across genres. Following a slew of leadership roles as artistic director for multiple music institutions, Blanchard was named in 2019 the inaugural Kenny Burrell Chair in Jazz Studies at UCLA's Herb Alpert School of Music. I'm struck when I listen to Blanchard's film scores and albums from throughout his broad career how his music soundtracks black living. His lyricism seems meant to act as constant inspiration. This pioneer bears witness to our troubles, our loves, our woes, and our triumphs. He hears the melody of our lives. What a beautiful tribute to the iconic Terrence Blanchard. And if you know him and you like his music, you can tag him in the tribute today. All right, we're headed back into reading Black AF History by I call him Michael Harriot Tubman, by Michael Harriot. It is a very engaging, enlightening, uh, humorously underscored reading. Today's chapter is entitled The World Recentered. The World Recentered. We just got through in his previous section talking about the real Wakanda and Mansa Musa and his effect on the financial markets of the world at his time. So let's see where Michael Harriot is taking us today in his writing. I'm going to try to find a good stopping point because we do want to have some conversation around what he is sharing in the reading. All right, here we go. There are so many worlds. Centuries after pharaohs, emperors, czars, sultans, khans, caliphs, and kings all took turns ruling the disparate, sometimes simultaneously existing regimes that historians then and now refer to as world ruling empires, a brand new dynasty emerged in South Carolina. Just as Rome, Egypt, Athens, or Carthage are considered by ancient historians as world capitals, for Black Americans, South Carolina stands as the capital of the known world. Now, apparently, both sets of my descendants, some of my descendants, came through South Carolina, meaning on my mother's side and on my father's side, although they did not stay in South Carolina. Understanding the history and legacy of Africans in America and America itself cannot begin with the tea tossing frat boys of Boston or even the self righteous Constitution writers of the North. America's fortune, fame, and even its independence began in South Carolina. In many ways, the Palmetto State served as the template for America's pseudo democracy, a system in which labor and intelligence was stolen from West Africa and enforced via enslavement and exploitation of their peoples. South Carolina's white settlers benefited from the evolution of human bondage in Virginia. If you recall where we last left off, the Jamestown colony was on the verge of collapse because the bumbling blue bloods didn't know how to farm, hunt, build, or survive, and were starving to death despite having land galore. While the Brits were loving the tobacco coming their way, the colonies still weren't exactly making a profit, to the point that the Virginia Company couldn't even pay its investors. They needed people with the know how and muscle to do things. But the rumors about disease, arrows to the leg, and colonizers literally having each other for dinner didn't help generate enthusiasm among working class Englanders to try out the new land. Even the poorest citizens had no desire to cross the ocean for a chance at starving to death. Now, I don't know if he's going to get to this in his reading, but I always say that America is an experiment, but it's also, to me, an experiment of the second sons. And what do I mean by that? A lot of the people that were coming over to the Americas to begin with were second sons. If you talk about the system of inheritance, we know most of the inheritance was going to the firstborn son, right? And if you were a second son in that time, you pretty much had very few options. You could either join the military, okay? You could become a clergyman, which a lot of them did, the second sons did, or you could become this sort of explorer, the person who was going to go out and carve their own way in the world, all right, to earn your wealth. So second sons back then didn't have all of these other options because again, most of the money and the inheritance and the land and all of that was going to go to the first son. If you're a second son or lower, you've got to find something else to do if you want some wealth outside of, your stipend that was being given to you through the eldest person. All right. So even though this American experiment is what we call it, we also have to realize it was being run mostly by the second sons of these empires. So we could say, I mean, people do say that America is baby Britain, but it's baby Britain in more than just one way. Now let's get back to what Michael Harriot is saying. To solve for this personnel problem, the Virginia Company came up with a novel solution. On November 18, 1618, the company passed the Orders and Constitutions, which included a provision that would rescue the failed experiment. Instead of enticing workers with money, the Virginia Company's Great Charter of Privileges, Orders, and Laws offered, ding, 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 free land grants to anyone who provided funds for poor people to move to the colonies. An affluent landowner would receive the rights to 50 acres for each head they brought over, garnering as much as 200 acres for a family of four. After a period of indentured servitude, the poor immigrants could hope to purchase land on credit from the wealthy landowners, move to unreserved land and claim squatters' rights, or sell their skills to the highest bidder. Of course, this system was flawed. The colonizing class are perhaps the most skilled loophole finders of all time. And what these Virginians lacked in farming and survival skills, they more than made up for with their propensity for exploitation. In 1638, George Menifee came up with a bright idea for how to scam his way into free land without losing his labor force after the indentured servants served their time of peonage. Menifee, a merchant farmer and member of the governor's council, was able to receive a patent for 3,000 acres, 1,150 of which he claimed for, quote, the Negroes I brought out of England with me. A year later, when Menifee earned another 3,000 acres for importing 60 more Africans, everyone jumped on the buy one slave, get 50 acres free bandwagon. Then in 1652, Virginia's legislature officially sealed the fate of its Negro servants. This is what they wrote. Whereas some doubts have arisen whether children got by any Englishman upon a Negro woman should be slave or free, be it therefore enacted and declared by this present Grand Assembly that all children born in this country shall be held bond or free only according to the condition of the mother. And that if any Christian shall commit fornication with a Negro man or woman, he or she so offending shall pay double the fines imposed by the former act. Which brings us to the uncomfortable point in American life and history that relationships, especially those that are interracial, have always been political. We didn't make it so. They did. Unlike the poor English, Irish, and native indentured servants, the African imports and their children were now considered property. The black head right scheme exploded after this. How did we get so many of them over here? I don't understand. This becomes the Negro problem when they can no longer exploit bodies for land. That's the Negro problem. We can no longer exploit you for land and labor and capital. So now, what was initially a scheme that was beneficial is no longer beneficial when the people are free. But again, that's a whole other program. In the 25 years after the colonial legislature made slavery intergenerational and perpetual, 125 land patents were approved, resulting in 1,649 Africans being shipped to Virginia. Jamestown's labor shortage was finally over, and a new system of big government handouts emerged. After all, what is capitalism if not a chance for capitalists to capitalize? By creating a legally binding, race based, intergenerational, perpetually oppressed class of human beings, Virginia revealed that all that nonsense in the colony's first charter about God, liberty, and true religion was a farce. Having lived in Virginia, when I tell people that there are people over there that still act like they're in 1619, I exaggerate not. Slavery was an American idea, not a product of the time. No law was passed in England that legalized slavery. No law. France's Code Noir was similar, but it would come 2 decades after Virginia's declaration. From its inception, America was always a pyramid scheme where the wealthy benefited from the labor of the poor. And still in 2025, we are still inside of a pyramid scheme. Think of a pyramid on the back of your money. And truly, there is only one term that befits Virginia's codified system of racial peonage: white pseudo supremacy. I add the word pseudo because it can never be supreme. South Carolina would not just take note, they would up the ante by creating their own version of racial hierarchy that built on all the advances Virginia made with head rights in human chattel. In 1663, a year after slavery officially became a Virginia birthright, and over 100 years after Lucas Vasquez de Ayllon made his bumbling attempt to gentrify South Carolina, King Charles granted 8 Lord Proprietors the rights to establish the British colony of Carolina and essentially rule the land as makeshift monarchs. One of the first acts of business was to enlist British political philosopher John Locke to co author the fundamental constitutions of Carolina. Coincidentally, Locke, who is known as the father of liberalism and whose philosophy on the fundamental rights of life, liberty, and property inspired a little document called the Declaration of Independence, was a major investor in the Royal African Company, the white-owned business that trafficked more enslaved Africans to America than any other entity. Locke enumerated the laws and rules for Carolina's organizing document, including a clause that would come to forever be known as Article 110, which stated, "Every freeman of Carolina shall have absolute power and authority over his Negro slaves, of what opinion or religion soever." Carolina's pseudo supremacy was baked into the social structure as one of the colony's founding principles, and slavery proliferated. Now, let me go back to what he said because a lot of people, for some reason, do not know this. The statement that we have, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, was originally written by Locke as life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. Who was that property? Humans, African humans, anybody who could be considered less than. All right. So that gets folded over into some nice flowery language of pursuit of happiness. What was their actual pursuit of happiness? The happiness of owning other people. Just thought you should know that. All right, moving right along. The proprietors of the Carolina Territory faced a plight similar to the situation recently overcome by Jamestown's venture capitalists. Not only did South Carolina's new residents have to deal with a hostile indigenous population, but the indentured English farmers had never seen a climate and soil like this. When South Carolina's early white residents saw what Virginia's elite class did with a few pieces of human property and access to head rights, they checked the stock price for enslaved people and said, "Peace, hold my ale." The Carolina colony would build an empire of enslavement. In 1672, Morris Matthews was granted several hundred acres overlooking the Ashley River, a few miles outside of England's first pre-planned city in the American colonies, Charlestown at Albemarle Point. 4 years later, Matthews gave up and sold the property to Thomas and Anne Drayton, a wealthy English couple who owned several forced labor citrus camps in Barbados. To expand their agricultural empire, the Draytons claimed head rights based on their stolen Africans still living in their Caribbean properties. Instead of transporting all their Bajan captives to Carolina, though they decided to supplement their enslaved stock by abducting a few prisoners from Africa's windward coast. The Draytons' business plan was impeccable. They now had amassed all the free labor they needed to build their bootleg version of Tropicana. So when people say, how do these people have all of this land? When I lived in Virginia, um, we went to a lot of the horse farms there, um, because we knew lots of trainers and stuff like that. And these people had 500 acres, 600 acres, 1,000 acre horse farms. And I'm just thinking to myself at the time, I was thinking to myself, how do they have all of this land? Who gave them all of this land? But when you go back and you understand that their ancestors were gaining this land by how many enslaved persons that they could bring to gain the land. They didn't get hundreds of thousands of acres because they worked hard for it. And then I started thinking about the number of people that are unhoused in this country, the number of people that don't have literally any place to go or any place to stay, and the small amount of landowners that we have that own the majority of the land here in America. And I think about how jacked up that is because you have all these landowners, um, who will not cede any land so that people can have a place to live because they're holding on to all of the land that they wouldn't have had their ancestors not captured people to gain acres upon acres upon acres of land. It's just mind boggling when you start thinking about that and you start putting the pieces together. The Drayton's plantation, called Magnolia, was located at the confluence of the Ashley River, the Stono River, and the Atlantic Ocean, which made it perfectly accessible to the rest of the world. However, the brackish water made growing tobacco, vegetables, or most food staples nearly impossible on a large scale, and the phosphorus-rich low country soil didn't allow for the citrus farming that they had mastered in Barbados. When the Draytons tried to jump on the silkworm bandwagon, that failed too. As white colonists in Carolina succumbed to an outbreak of malaria and yellow fever in a tale as old as America, the Draytons began running out of time, money, and food. Curiously, the Draytons noticed their enslaved servants did not seem a bit worried at all. When they investigated, the privileged, not actual planters, discovered that the Africans had been growing their own food, including a crop that the Draytons had never seen produced by an English laborer or white Barbadian bondsman. Let me just take my sip. So let's reiterate. While y'all are starving, while y'all are trying to figure it out, while y'all are dying, from malaria, the Africans are still going on. And some people are mad about that because this is gonna always be the case. The Africans was doing fine. They were enslaved. They were being treated as property, but they were doing fine. So they had to investigate. And what did they find? The Africans were growing rice. Rice growing is a difficult venture. If you've ever had Carolina gold rice, you know how good that rice is. Planting, growing, and harvesting the staple requires the engineering of levees, dams, and dikes. So where did they get these engineering skills from? Aside from the west coast of Africa, the only regions in the world that produce rice on a large scale were in Asia and a few in Italy. In a humid climate like Carolina, it is a backbreaking prospect that fosters disease, dehydration, and exhaustion. But even in these conditions, the Drayton stolen human class were able to persevere, saving the family from starvation and the entire Carolina economic system from collapse. With the introduction of America's first cash crop, edible cash crop, the Draytons were not engineers, nor were they farmers, but they had money, absolute power and authority over their Negro slaves, and a sense of just how valuable it would be to grow this crop on a massive scale. So they proceeded to raid Sierra Leone and the West African Rice Coast to pilfer the people who would provide the knowledge and the manpower to continue growing the grain that would become a South Carolina staple. Now, my co host and I always talk about this, and we've said it on several of our shows. These people knew exactly who they were going to get. They weren't just arbitrarily snatching Africans from just anywhere. Most maps now, if you look on them, especially in your museums, they're going to have that whole western coast labeled. Part of it will say Gold Coast, some of it will say Rice Coast. In other words, it wasn't just where to get the product, but it was where to get the people who could make or who could cultivate the product. So when you see Gold Coast, it isn't just about extracting the resource, it's about extracting the people who know how to operate the resource. When you see Rice Coast, it's about these are the people we need to go get in order to have our rice cultivated in the Americas. So this whole talk and lie about unskilled laborers and how, oh, black Africans should be so thankful to have been brought to America to learn these skills. That's what they're teaching in public schools, by the way, is a lie. They raided Sierra Leone to get the people who would provide the knowledge and the manpower to continue growing the grain that they had no skill and no knowledge and ability to grow. Their genius plan had a few flaws, however. The slave thieves figured they could just throw a net over a few Africans and they would all magically have advanced horticultural degrees in rice growing that would directly translate to the Carolina colony. Naturally, these enlightened men did not take into account that Africa, a continent larger than the United States, Brazil, Italy, and China combined, was rich with biodiversity and thereby necessitated different methods of cultivation. In Africa, there were rice cultures, each with its own distinct botanical adaptation according to the topography, geography, and the soil. In the rain-fed uplands region of present-day Sierra Leone and Liberia, women drop grains into shallow holes made by a special hoe then covered the seeds with the heels of their feet. In the Senegambian swamps, growers planted rice in pottery and transferred them to the swamps after the seedlings grew roots. South of the Gambia River near Guinea, African agriculturalists constructed an elaborate network of embankments, dikes, canals, and sluice grates that serves to bar the entry of marine water while retaining waterfall for field saturation and rice cultivation. And in America, the embezzled empire builders from different languages, cultures, and countries were forced to adapt their ways of knowing to create an entirely new African based rice growing system that the wealthiest, most enlightened white men in the world could not figure out for themselves. Since the beginning of this people stealing project, because that's what it was, the slave system relied mostly on black males who had the muscle to perform laborious tasks. And so, like in many enslaved societies, men greatly outnumbered women in the colonies. In Virginia Surry County, for instance, there were 145 men for every 100 women in the 1670s. But in the South Carolina colonies, the male to female ratio would eventually reach 1 to 1 after plantation owners realized that African women were the ones who possessed the engineering and agricultural knowledge necessary to grow what will become known as Carolina gold. And I am going to stop there. Give you one more sentence. In the early 1700s, Indian agent Thomas Nairn observed that African women were not only capable of most rice growing tasks, but they seemed to know better than the men around them. After a few calculations, Nairn hypothesized that his large forced labor camp could increase his production by 50% if he put women in the field alongside the men. Nairn was right. In most West African rice societies, men rarely did any farming aside from the occasional heavy lifting. Nairn would never be able to test out his hypothesis. He was tortured and unalived by Yamasee natives for thinking he could negotiate a settlement after stealing their land. Still, by 1710, enslavers knew to demand the same price for African women as they did for African men, and thus came the influx of women into the area. Now I could get into how we have always been in some way, shape, or form working side by side with each other. We have always both had to work. That's a whole other conversation. And that us working side by side and working together in many cases is what helped us in some cases to revolt and escape. I could get into that, but I won't do it this show. And the people who are trying to rewrite history and think I don't need a black man or I don't need a black woman, either side of that equation, y'all need to pay attention to history. Um, but that's for another show and another time. All right. I hope that you enjoyed today's reading, learning about Terrence Blanchard and his incredible work, and also learning a little bit about South Carolina, Carolina Gold, Virginia colonies, um, and the ingenuity that Africans in America brought with them. Hope you enjoyed. All right. If you are looking by YouTube, I want to say thank you for your time and attention, and we will see you on tomorrow. Take care, be well, and most importantly, be light. All right. If